Liverpool, 1957, a church festival on Woolton Road. A 15-year-old boy named John Lennon was playing with his skiffle band in the churchyard. A 14-year-old boy named Paul McCartney was in the audience. After the set, someone introduced them. McCartney played a song on guitar. Lennon listened. Within weeks, McCartney was in the band. That afternoon in a churchyard in Liverpool is where everything began. The most successful partnership in the history of popular music. Two boys who would write 200 songs together, travel the world, change everything, and then spend the rest of their lives failing to properly say goodbye to each other. This is their story, not the version you already know, the one that got left out. They went to Hamburg because nobody in England wanted them. It was 1960. The band, John, Paul, George, Stuart Sutcliffe on bass, and Pete Best on drums, was booked to play the Indra Club on the Reeperbahn, Hamburg's red light district. They were paid the equivalent of almost nothing. They slept in a storeroom behind a cinema screen. The clubs wanted them to play 8 hours a night. 8 hours. The same songs over and over until the crowds thinned and the lights went out. It nearly broke them. It also made them. Lennon later said, "I might have been born in Liverpool, but I grew up in Hamburg." The hours of playing turned them into something nobody in England had seen yet. Tight, electric, dangerous. A band that had been forged in the worst conditions possible and come out harder for it. They returned to Liverpool in 1961. Changed men. The Cavern Club. The queues around the block. Brian Epstein in the audience in his suit, watching 4 young men play to screaming teenagers, and understanding that he was watching something that would change the world. He offered to manage them. They accepted. The suits, the haircuts, the matching stage moves. Brian Epstein invented the public Beatles, and the public Beatles conquered the world. Pete Best had been with them since the beginning. He had joined in August 1960, the day before their first Hamburg trip. He had slept in the storeroom behind the cinema screen. He had played 8 hours a night in the Reeperbahn clubs. He had done every gig, every late night, every cold trip back from Liverpool in the back of a van. On August 16, 1962, Brian Epstein called him to his office. Epstein was pacing, biting his nails. He couldn't look Pete in the eye. After a few minutes, he said, "The boys want you out. Ringo's star is coming in." Best said later, "I was completely shell-shocked. There was no warning, no conversation. They were my mates. I had been with them through the rough times." He was never given a reason. John, Paul, and George had met in secret and made the decision. The man who delivered the news was the manager. None of the three ever spoke to Pete Best directly about why he was removed. 6 weeks later, the Beatles recorded Love Me Do. Within a year, they were the most famous band in the world. Pete Best was 20 years old when they fired him. He spent the next decade struggling with depression. He worked as a civil servant. He drove a bread van. He went bankrupt. He is still alive. He is 83 years old. He still plays music. He missed everything. Not because he wasn't good enough, because 3 men made a decision in a room and nobody told him until it was done. There was a 5th Beatle. His name was Stuart Sutcliffe. Most people have never heard of him. Sutcliffe met Lennon at Liverpool College of Art in 1959. He was a painter, genuinely talented, someone teachers described as exceptional. He had just sold a painting for £60. Lennon convinced him to use the money to buy a bass guitar and join the band. Sutcliffe couldn't really play. He faced the amplifier on stage, so audiences couldn't see his hands. But he was Lennon's best friend. He was the fifth member. In Hamburg, Sutcliffe met a German photographer named Astrid Kirchherr. He fell in love with her completely. He decided to stay in Hamburg when the others returned to Liverpool. He enrolled in art school. He gave up the bass. McCartney, who had always been critical of Sutcliffe's playing, took over on bass. In April 1962, Stuart Sutcliffe collapsed in Astrid's arms. He died of a brain hemorrhage the same day. He was 21 years old. Lennon was told when the band landed in Hamburg for a tour date. He didn't cancel the show. He played that night. Those who were there said he played like a man who was trying to outrun something. Lennon never spoke publicly about Sutcliffe's death in any depth. It was the loss that went unprocessed. The friend who left and never came back. Astrid Kirchherr lived until 2020. She kept Sutcliffe's paintings on her walls for 58 years. What happened next was not fame. It was something else entirely. By 1964, the Beatles couldn't leave a hotel room. They couldn't walk down a street. They couldn't hear their own music on stage because the screaming never stopped. At Shea Stadium in 1965, they played to 55,000 people who were making so much noise that the band couldn't hear each other. Lennon said later, "We were absolutely terrified. We didn't know what was going on." They toured for 4 years. Every city the same, every hotel the same screaming, the same locked rooms, the same inability to exist as ordinary people. In 1966, they played their last concert at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Nobody announced it as the last concert. They just stopped. They walked off stage and never toured again. They went into the studio. They made Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. They made The White Album. They made Abbey Road. They made music that nobody could have made on a stage in front of 55,000 screaming people. The screaming had cost them something, but what they made in the silence after it was extraordinary. George Harrison wrote Something. Frank Sinatra called it the greatest love song of the 20th century. He performed it 1,400 times. He attributed it to Lennon and McCartney for the first 2 years. The songwriting credit was on the record, George Harrison, but he kept telling audiences it was John and Paul's. It took him 2 years to correct the record publicly. George Harrison was the quiet one, the youngest, the one who sat in the back of press conferences and said as little as possible, while John and Paul performed for the cameras. He was also, arguably, the most spiritually serious of the four. The one who went to India and came back changed. The one who gave $15 million of his own money to fund Monty Python's Life of Brian because he wanted to see the film and nobody else would pay for it. In the Beatles, his songs were rationed, 2 per album, while Lennon and McCartney filled the rest. He had written Something, Here Comes the Sun, while My Guitar Gently Weeps, and was limited to 2 tracks. He said later, "I had a backlog of about 30 songs when the Beatles ended. I just couldn't get them on the records." His first solo album, All Things Must Pass, is a triple record, 30 songs. The backlog finally released. It outsold every other solo Beatle album of 1970. John Lennon walked into a room and said, "I am leaving the Beatles." It was September 1969. The others, Paul, George, Ringo, looked at him. Nobody said anything immediately. Lennon said later that saying it out loud felt like a divorce, like something ending that he had believed would go on forever, even as he was ending it. He asked them to keep it quiet. Apple was in the middle of negotiations. Business reasons. The announcement came from McCartney in April 1970. when he released his first solo album and included a self-written Q&A, saying he had no plans to work with the Beatles again. The world blamed Paul McCartney for the breakup for decades. McCartney spent 50 years correcting this. In 2021, he said plainly, "I didn't instigate the split. That was our Johnny." The real cause was more complicated than any one person. Alan Klein, the manager Lennon, Harrison, and Starr hired over McCartney's explicit objection, the lawsuits, the money, Yoko Ono in the recording studio, a presence McCartney and Harrison found difficult. The sheer weight of being the Beatles for 10 years while the world watched every move. But the decision was Lennon's. He walked into a room and said it. McCartney said later, "It was the most difficult period of my life." For 10 years, Lennon and McCartney fought through music. Lennon released How Do You Sleep in 1971, a song directed at McCartney. "The only thing you done was yesterday," he sang, "not subtle, not veiled. A character assassination in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. McCartney responded quietly, a song called Dear Friend on the Wings album Wildlife. Quiet and mournful. Was it 1,000,000 to 1? Was it just a game to you? He said later about Dear Friend, "I find it very emotional when I listen to it now. I have to sort of choke it back." Even in the attacks, they were still talking to each other, still fighting like brothers, as one observer put it. John referred to Paul as his best friend, even in the songs where he was tearing him apart. By the mid-1970s, the hostility had softened. Lennon was in New York, house husband to Sean, baking bread, out of the music business. McCartney was touring with Wings. In April 1976, Lorne Michaels appeared on Saturday Night Live and offered the Beatles $3,000 to reunite on live television. A joke, but Lennon and McCartney were watching in the same apartment at the Dakota that night. They considered going. They decided against it. That was the last time they were in the same room. Paul McCartney got the call at his farm in Scotland. His daughter Stella was there. She later described what she saw as the biggest emotional reaction she had ever seen from her father. He walked outside. He stood in the field. He couldn't speak. John Lennon had been shot outside the Dakota building in New York. He was 40 years old. McCartney drove to a recording studio that day. He had a session booked, and he went. He was asked by a journalist outside what he thought of Lennon's death. He said, "It's a drag, isn't it?" The world judged him for it. For decades, people cited that quote as evidence of McCartney's coldness. What they didn't see was what Stella saw. What happened in the field before the cameras found him. McCartney said later that he never properly processed the loss, that there was no goodbye, no resolution, just the phone call and the silence after it. The things left unsaid between them, the 10 years of fighting, the friendship before it, the afternoons in Hamburg, the church festival in Woolton where it began. All of it ended without a conversation. That is the grief that stays forever, not the grief of things said, the grief of things that never got the chance to be said. They made 213 songs in 8 years. They existed as the Beatles for less time than it takes to complete a university degree. 4 young men from Liverpool who were together from 1960 to 1970, and in that decade changed popular music permanently and completely. George Harrison died of cancer in 2001. He was 58 years old. His last words, according to his son, were, "Love one another." Ringo Starr is still alive. He is 84 years old. He still tours. He still plays with a little help from my friends. To audiences who know every word, Paul McCartney is still alive. He is 83 years old. He played Glastonbury in 2022 and sang Beatles songs to 200,000 people. He paused the show and said, "John, wherever you are, this is for you." Then he played I've Got a Feeling, with John Lennon's voice projected beside him from archival footage. The mythology around the Beatles is so thick and so old that it has become almost impossible to see them clearly. The greatest band, the greatest partnership, the greatest tragedy. But underneath the mythology are 4 young men from a city in the north of England who played 8 hours a night in Hamburg because nobody else wanted them, who lost their drummer without telling him why, who lost their 5th member to a brain hemorrhage at 21, who conquered the world and then couldn't stand to be in the same room together, who fought with each other for 10 years through the medium of pop songs, who never properly said goodbye. If this story meant something to you, this series is just beginning. Subscribe, because there are more stories like this one, and every one of them is true. Liverpool, 1957, a church festival on Woolton Road. Everything that followed came from that afternoon.